Picture this. You're checking your phone on an ordinary Wednesday afternoon when suddenly everything stops. Your screen goes black. Every car on the highway stutters to a halt. The streetlights fade. And within seconds, a nation that runs on instant everything is thrown back 150 years. No warning, no gradual failure, just silence. That's the reality of an electromagnetic pulse event. And here's something that keeps me up at night. Most people wouldn't survive the first 90 days. But you're going to be different because you're here right now learning what to do before it happens. I'm Zach. I've been prepping since 2012, and today I'm breaking down exactly what life looks like after an EMP strike, and more importantly, how you actually survive it. Let's get into it. So what exactly are we dealing with when we talk about an EMP? An electromagnetic pulse is a massive surge of energy that fries anything with circuits, wires, or electronic components. It can disrupt and permanently damage electrical components and entire systems within most critical infrastructure sectors. And in today's world, that's pretty much everything we depend on to stay alive. There are three main ways an EMP can hit us, and you need to understand each one because they require slightly different responses. First up is the high-altitude electromagnetic pulse, or HEMP. This is the nightmare scenario. A single high-altitude nuclear detonation could affect large sections of the national electric grid and other critical infrastructure control systems. We're talking about a weapon detonated anywhere from 25 to 400 miles above us. The terrifying part? One well-placed detonation could blanket most of the continental United States. That's not fear-mongering, that's physics. The second threat is a coronal mass ejection from the sun. Think of it as a solar tantrum that sends plasma hurtling toward Earth. Back in 1859, something called the Carrington event hit our planet so hard that telegraph wires sparked and caught fire. Operators could send messages with their batteries completely disconnected. That was with 19th century technology. Our modern grid, with its billions of sensitive transistors and thousands of miles of transmission lines, exponentially more vulnerable. We dodged the bullet in 2012 when a massive solar storm missed Earth by just 9 days. 9 days. If it had hit us, we'd still be recovering. The third possibility is localized non-nuclear EMP devices, sometimes called E-bombs. These specialized conventional munitions or non-nuclear directed energy devices can have effects ranging from highly local to regional. Military forces already use these to disable enemy electronics. While they wouldn't take down the entire country at once, they could create devastating regional blackouts that cascade into wider failures. A terrorist group hitting a few strategic substations with these devices could cripple entire regions. Here's what makes all three of these threats absolutely terrifying: speed. We're not talking about a hurricane you can evacuate from or a pandemic with an incubation period. The impacts are likely to cascade, initially compromising one or more critical infrastructure sectors, spilling over into additional sectors or geographic regions. Within nanoseconds, transformers fry. Within seconds, control centers go dark. Within minutes, everything built on those systems collapses in sequence. You're in the middle of the disaster before you even know what happened. Now, let me paint you a picture of what the first 30 minutes actually look like on the ground, because understanding this timeline is critical to your survival plan. The power disappears with no visible cause, no storm, no explosion you can see, just sudden darkness. Most vehicles built after the mid-90s immediately stall because their engine control units and ignition circuits get overloaded. Imagine every highway in America turning into a parking lot in seconds. Cellular towers fail as their backup batteries drain, fighting against the induced currents. Air traffic control radar screens go black. Hospital ventilators freeze. And millions of homes experience what I call simultaneous appliance death. Everything from your smart fridge to your furnace controls just stops working. But here's what nobody talks about: the psychological impact of universal silence. Take the quietest moment you've ever experienced and multiply it across an entire city. No hum of air conditioners, no distant traffic noise, no music bleeding from buildings, just eerie silence that immediately triggers panic in the unprepared.
Extreme electromagnetic incidents could damage significant portions of the nation's critical infrastructure, including the electrical grid, communications equipment, water and wastewater systems, and transportation modes. In these first 30 minutes, the lucky ones are those with older vehicles that still run, those near their homes rather than trapped in elevators or subway tunnels, and those who immediately recognize what's happening instead of waiting for emergency alerts that will never come.
As we move from the first hour into the first full day, the cascading failures accelerate at a pace most people can't imagine. With no grid power, water utilities stop pumping as soon as their diesel generators run dry. That means no water pressure coming through your taps. Wastewater starts backing up into low-lying drains, creating immediate health hazards. Refineries can't move crude oil through their cracked pumps, and the entire just-in-time food pipeline halts at every point where a microchip controls a valve, a conveyor, a gate, or even something as simple as a barcode scanner. Let's be brutally honest about our food supply. Grocery stores run on razor-thin inventories, with the average city holding roughly 3 days of food under ideal conditions. These are not ideal conditions. Law enforcement communications collapse alongside 911 networks. Police cruisers with older analog ignitions might still run, but their digital radios are compromised, forcing officers to coordinate by shouting or using personal cell phones that no longer function. That uniform presence that normally reassures a nervous public dwindles by the hour. Hospitals transform from places of healing into death traps. Modern ventilators, infusion pumps, and automated medication cabinets freeze up. Elevators trap staff and patients between floors. Even when backup generators successfully start, they're only designed for short blackouts and will consume their stored diesel in 2 to 3 days. The replacement fuel deliveries they're counting on? Never arriving. For anyone with acute medical needs, the countdown to crisis has already begun. Back in 2016, I visited a regional hospital for a prepping article I was writing, and the emergency manager told me something chilling. Their backup power was designed to keep critical systems running for 72 hours maximum. After that, they had no plan. None. They were relying on the grid coming back or fuel deliveries that would never make it through gridlocked streets. That conversation changed how I prep for my own family's medical needs. By day 2, reality sinks in for city dwellers. Tap water has completely stopped. Toilets no longer flush. Refrigeration is gone. Gas station pumps are dead. Even those smart enough to keep cash on hand find it essentially useless because point-of-sale systems require power. What starts as panic buying quickly becomes widespread looting, first for essentials like bottled water and canned goods, then eventually for anything that might be tradable. Government emergency stockpiles that were supposed to feed local populations turn out to be extremely limited and geographically sparse. Even FEMA's own documents admit their supply chains for mass feeding programs assume functioning highways and intact communications, both of which would be completely absent. As rumors spread faster than facts through word of mouth, civil order begins to erode dramatically. This is when you start seeing ad hoc militia patrols appearing to guard apartment blocks or rural crossroads. The loss of communications creates information deserts where nobody knows what's happening even a few miles away. Is the government responding? Has power been restored in the next county? Is help coming? Without answers, fear festers and people make decisions based on worst-case assumptions. By the end of the first week, the social fabric holding communities together starts tearing as trust evaporates and survival instincts kick in.
Now, before we go deeper into the long-term survival strategies, I want to share something with you that can make a massive difference in your preparedness journey. Because I know how overwhelming all of this can feel, especially when you're just starting out or trying to build your preps on a tight budget. I put together a completely free resource that I genuinely wish I'd had when I started prepping back in 2012. It's called the $50 Food Supply Guide, and it reveals exactly how to turn just $50 into a 90-day food supply for your family. No fancy freeze-dried meals that cost a fortune, no complicated systems, just a simple, proven plan that actually works. This guide includes the exact shopping list with specific brands and prices, 37 essential items most people never think to stockpile, and emergency meals you can make with zero cooking fuel or electricity. There's even a section on the gas station snack that becomes incredibly valuable for bartering when the system breaks down.
The link is in the description below and it's pinned in the comments. It's completely free. I'm not selling you anything. I just want to make sure you have this resource because it complements everything we're talking about today. Grab it, print it out, and start building that food security for your family. Trust me, having even a basic stockpile will put you miles ahead of 99% of the population if something like an EMP ever happens. Okay, let's get back to it. As we move into weeks 2 and 3 after an EMP, we witness what can only be described as the death of modernity itself. Without refrigeration, 100% of perishable food spoils, creating not just hunger but a massive public health crisis. Millions of pounds of rotting food attract vermin and spread disease. Livestock on industrial farms die from heat, dehydration, or starvation when their automated feed and cooling systems fail. All that grain stored in silos can't be milled without electric motors. The chlorination plants sitting idle mean that any city water still available has become a pathogen cocktail. Petroleum refining is completely offline, so the fuel in underground tanks becomes a finite, dwindling resource. Once generators and agricultural machinery run dry, nearly every mechanized survival tool we depend on simply disappears.
Medical supply chains break down completely. Insulin stocks perish without refrigeration. Antibiotics degrade. Trauma care reverts to Civil War-era field surgery conditions. Here's a sobering truth that government studies have confirmed. Starvation, exposure, disease, and violence will claim the majority of urban populations within this 3-month window. That's not speculation. Those are scenarios described in multiple EMP Commission briefings to the highest levels of government. The hard reality is that a society built entirely on just-in-time delivery systems and computerized infrastructure simply cannot function when those systems vanish overnight. By month 3, we're not talking about an inconvenience or even a traditional disaster. We're talking about the collapse of the entire system that sustains modern human life in dense population centers. Most critical infrastructure system vulnerabilities can be reduced, but recovery times could extend to months to years depending on the scope of damage. So how do you actually survive this? When power, food, and law all evaporate simultaneously, survival defaults to what I call the rule of reality. You focus exclusively on the primal essentials that keep human beings alive. Let me break down the 5 core needs you must address, and I mean must, not should. First and most critical is water. Water is essential for human survival, and dehydration can set in quickly in emergency situations. You need immediate access to at least 1 gallon per person per day, plus redundant purification methods. I'm talking gravity filters, chemical treatment with calcium hypochlorite, and the ability to boil water when needed. After an EMP, city water cannot be trusted once pressure loss allows contaminants to seep into the system. Let me tell you about a mistake I made early in my prepping journey. I had stored water, sure, but I only had one method to purify additional water, a ceramic filter. That's it, one single point of failure. Then, the filter cracked during a camping trip, and I realized how screwed I'd be in a real emergency. Now I keep multiple purification methods, including purification tablets, a gravity-fed system, and good old-fashioned bleach. Redundancy saves lives. Second is security. Opportunistic violence increases in direct proportion to population density. Layered defense starts with hardened doors, window bars or boards, blackout curtains to prevent light signatures at night, and round-the-clock watch rotations for your family or group. Radio-free communication, like whistles or visual codes, become essential when electronics are dead. Third is shelter and warmth. Your dependence on thermostats and electric furnaces ends the moment the grid goes down. Wood stoves, kerosene heaters, and heavy-duty thermal coverings for windows become literal save-lifers, especially in northern climates where winter temperatures can kill faster than hunger. If you live somewhere with cold winters and you don't have a non-electric heat source, you need to fix that yesterday.
Fourth is food. Focus on shelf-stable calories. Grains, beans, freeze-dried meals, lard, honey. These actually become a form of currency in a grid-down scenario. Gardens require non-hybrid seeds that reproduce true to type and manual tools that don't need power. Any livestock you keep will demand careful fodder planting, since you can't just run to the feed store anymore. Fifth is medicine. Pharmacies close and prescriptions can't be refilled. You need at least a 6-month cache of any critical medications family members require. Store broad-spectrum antibiotics if you can legally acquire them. Have wound care supplies sufficient for serious injuries. Even morale-boosting basics like caffeine and electrolyte packets help maintain both physical and psychological resilience. These aren't suggestions or good ideas. They're the absolute baseline requirements for staying alive when every system we rely on vanishes at once. The rule of reality doesn't care about your retirement plans or whether you think the scenario is likely. It only cares about whether you've prepared for these 5 core needs before they become impossible to address. One of the most debated topics in EMP preparedness is whether you should bug in at your home or bug out to a secondary location. After an EMP, this decision becomes dramatically more complicated because highways essentially lock up as immobilized vehicles strangle every lane. Trying to trek out on foot exposes families to both the desperation of others and the risk of ambush by those who quickly figure out that travelers likely carry supplies. Most experienced preppers choose to bug in unless they already maintain a fully stocked retreat property that's reachable by off-road paths or secondary routes. A defensible home with water access, stored fuel, and community allies simply offers the highest survival odds for most people. The familiar environment also provides psychological comfort during extremely stressful times, and you'll have all your supplies already in place, rather than only what you could carry. If you absolutely must relocate after an EMP, you need to have planned multiple alternate routes, supply caches along those routes, and non-electronic navigation methods established well before disaster strikes. This isn't something you can improvise when every road is jammed with dead vehicles and desperate people. The golden rule here is brutal but true. If you haven't already prepared your bug-out location and practiced getting there under adverse conditions, bugging in is almost always the better survival choice in an EMP scenario. I learned this lesson the hard way during a regional power outage in 2018. I thought I had a great bug-out plan to my buddy's cabin 3 hours away. When I actually tried to execute it during the outage, I hit roadblocks, detours, and traffic I hadn't accounted for. What should have been a 3-hour drive took 9 hours, and I burned through way more fuel than planned. If that had been a real EMP with stalled cars everywhere, I never would have made it. Now my primary plan is to shelter in place with my supplies right here.
Let's talk about the preparations specifically tailored to an EMP event that differ from general disaster readiness. The first critical prep is Faraday protection for your essential electronics. You can create a basic Faraday cage by wrapping critical devices in 2 layers of heavy aluminum foil separated by cardboard, then storing them inside a steel trash can with a tight-fitting lid. Multiple tests have confirmed that these nested conductive barriers dramatically reduce field strength and can protect sensitive electronics from most EMP scenarios. What should you protect? Ham radios or GMRS handhelds, a backup solar charger, thumb drives loaded with survival manuals, spare laptop, maybe even a tablet loaded with reference materials. These become your information lifeline when all other sources go silent. Just remember, any device you're actively using when the EMP hits won't be protected, so this is about preserving backup equipment. Next, you need to replace electric tools with manual alternatives. Swap electric saws for crosscut saws, cordless drills for hand braces, food processors for hand-cranked grain mills. These aren't just backup tools. In a post-EMP world, they become your only tools. Small-scale solar panels tied to DC LED lighting and low-draw radio chargers will dramatically outperform gas generators that sit useless once fuel supplies are exhausted. Focus on 12-volt DC systems that can run directly from batteries without requiring inverters. For transportation, older diesel vehicles with minimal electronics, particularly those from the pre-1980s era, have the best survival odds. Keep spare starters, alternators, and glow plug relays in metallic shielding. If you have the technical skills, consider converting at least one vehicle to mechanical points ignition. I've got a 1978 Chevy truck that's completely mechanical. No computer chips, no fancy electronics. It's not pretty, and it's not efficient by modern standards, but it'll run after an EMP when everyone else's vehicles are paperweights.
Communications become critical for situational awareness. Store handheld ham or GMRS radios plus reference guides in your Faraday cage. A small roll-up antenna and plenty of spare batteries enable short-range neighborhood coordination when all other communications are down. Even if you're not a licensed ham operator now, having the equipment protected means you can learn to use it after an event when FCC regulations are the least of anyone's worries. These EMP-specific preparations form a unique layer of resilience that standard disaster prep doesn't address. They acknowledge the particular vulnerability of electronic systems and create workarounds that don't depend on the grid or complex supply chains to function. Each one addresses a specific weakness that an EMP would exploit, creating islands of capability in a sea of technological devastation.
The harsh reality of a post-EMP world is that desperate populations will target anyone perceived to have supplies. This makes defense and community formation not optional extras, but core survival requirements. You need to harden your perimeter with physical barriers like thorn hedges, motion chimes powered by mechanical springs, overlapping fields of observation, and concealed fallback positions in case your primary defense is breached. A lone family, no matter how well armed, is easy prey for determined groups. But a disciplined, block-wide coalition controlling a neighborhood choke point becomes a serious deterrent to opportunistic raiders. Shared watch rotations free individuals to rest properly. Pooled labor dramatically accelerates essential projects like gardening, woodcutting, and sanitation work. Collective purchasing power lets you acquire more preps for less money before disaster strikes. Community building needs to start long before disaster strikes. Get to know your neighbors now. Identify those with useful skills like medical training, mechanical aptitude, or security backgrounds, and begin forming those relationships of trust. In a crisis, you don't rise to the occasion, you fall to your level of preparation, and that includes social preparation. Here's something I figured out after years of prepping. The lone wolf survivalist fantasy is just that, a fantasy. I used to think I could handle everything myself. Then I participated in a weekend grid-down simulation with some other preppers, and it became painfully obvious how quickly exhaustion sets in when you're trying to maintain security, process food, manage water, and handle all the other survival tasks by yourself. Having a trusted team multiplies your capabilities exponentially. The communities that survive long-term after an EMP will be those that quickly establish fair rules, shared responsibilities, and mutual protection pacts, while maintaining enough flexibility to adapt as conditions change. Start building those relationships now. Organize neighborhood barbecues, start a community garden, create a local preparedness group. The social infrastructure you build today becomes your survival network tomorrow. If you make it through the first 3 months after an EMP, your focus must shift from immediate life support to sustainable subsistence for the long haul. Establish high-yield gardens using heirloom seeds, focusing on calorie-dense staples like potatoes and winter squash that give you the most nutrition for your labor investment. Convert every south-facing wall into a passive solar dehydrator to preserve harvests without power. Construct rocket mass heaters from brick and stovepipe that slash fuel consumption by up to 80% compared to conventional wood stoves. These ingenious devices capture heat that would normally escape up the chimney and radiate it slowly into your living space. I built one in my workshop a few years back, and the efficiency is incredible. I use maybe a quarter of the wood I used to burn. Sanitation becomes a life-or-death issue in the absence of municipal systems. Dig 2-stage composting latrines at least 200 feet from any water source. Line them with lime and carbon-rich straw to accelerate pathogen breakdown and prevent groundwater contamination. Replace disposable hygiene products with washable cloth alternatives. Make soap from wood ash lye. Switch to reusable straight razors that don't require replacement cartridges. The key to long-term adaptation is designing systems that don't require inputs you can't produce yourself. Every dependency on something you have to scavenge or trade for
represents a potential failure point in your survival plan. The goal is to gradually transform from a consumer of stored supplies into a producer of essential resources, creating closed-loop systems that can sustain themselves indefinitely with minimal outside inputs. Think about it this way. Your stored food will eventually run out. Your ammunition will eventually run out. Your fuel will eventually run out. But a garden that produces seeds for next year's garden? That's renewable. A water source you can access and purify? That's renewable. Skills you can teach to others? That's renewable. Long-term survival isn't about having the biggest stockpile. It's about creating sustainable systems. In a post-EMP landscape, currency quickly reverts to tangible assets with real-world utility. Salt, spices, medical consumables, ammunition in common calibers, alcohol, and most importantly, mechanical expertise. The time to acquire trade skills is now, before disaster forces a crash course under life or death pressure. Focus on abilities like small engine repair, herbal medicine, leatherworking, and blacksmithing that directly address essential needs without requiring complex infrastructure. A functioning grain mill or a water-powered alternator can literally anchor a microeconomy in the ruins of the grid. People will bring their grain or batteries from miles around if you can provide services they can't replicate themselves. Skills that seem quaintly old-fashioned today, candle making, rope braiding, fermentation, become cornerstone industries when industrial production collapses. I started learning blacksmithing in 2019, not because I thought I'd need it for an EMP specifically, but because I recognized that metalworking skills have been valuable in literally every civilization throughout human history. If society collapses, somebody who can repair tools, forge hardware, and work metal will never go hungry. The most valuable commodities in this environment aren't gold or silver, but consumables that improve quality of life. Pain relievers, antibiotics, seasoning agents, chemical light sources. The prepared survivor positions themselves to produce or repair items with daily utility, creating value exchanges that strengthen community bonds while securing their own position within the new economic web. Here's a counterintuitive insight. In a post-EMP world, the person who knows how to fix a bicycle becomes more valuable than the person who owned 10 bicycles. The person who knows how to preserve food becomes more valuable than the person who stockpiled a year's worth of canned goods. Skills appreciate over time, while stockpiles depreciate. Invest in knowledge and capabilities, not just stuff.
Here's something too many preppers overlook. Survival is much more than calories and firepower. Boredom, grief, and survivor's guilt fracture group cohesion faster than starvation in many cases. The psychological dimension of long-term crisis requires deliberate planning, just like your water supply. Stock non-electronic entertainment options, including card decks, musical instruments, printed books, and even hand-cranked phonographs that provide cultural continuity when digital entertainment vanishes. Implement daily routines with purposeful labor, followed by structured downtime, communal meals, and morale-building rituals. Whether that's prayer for religious groups, storytelling traditions, or ceremonial guard changes that reinforce the community's commitment to mutual protection. These seemingly small psychological supports prevent the despair that leads to rash decisions or community breakdown. The mind navigates crisis through narrative, the stories we tell ourselves about what's happening and why it matters. Communities that maintain a forward-looking narrative about rebuilding rather than just surviving will outperform groups fixated solely on immediate threats. I experienced this firsthand during a winter camping trip that went sideways when a storm rolled in and trapped us for 4 extra days. The group that maintained routines, told stories, and kept spirits up handled the stress far better than the group that just focused on survival tasks. Mental resilience is a skill you can develop, and it matters just as much as your physical preps. Cultivate storytellers and meaning makers alongside your gardeners and guards. They preserve the humanity that makes survival worthwhile in the first place. Keep board games, playing cards, books, musical instruments. Create rituals and traditions even in the midst of crises. These things might seem frivolous when you're worried about food and water, but they're what keep people from giving up when times get darkest.
Many Americans assume government response to a catastrophic EMP would be swift and comprehensive. The reality is far more sobering. Even optimistic Department of Energy models concede that replacing a single large power transformer takes months under perfect conditions with functioning supply chains. The United States has minimal domestic manufacturing capacity for these critical components and relies heavily on overseas suppliers. Simultaneously, replacing hundreds of transformers damaged by an EMP is logistically impossible inside a year, even with total government mobilization. There are emerging grid hardening initiatives. Programs have directed billions toward EMP-class surge protectors, but coverage remains fractional at best, protecting only the most critical infrastructure nodes rather than the distribution network that serves homes and businesses.
Citizens should realistically expect highly fragmented federal aid, selective National Guard deployments concentrated around critical infrastructure or political centers, ration lines guarded by armed escorts, and curfews justified by emergency powers. Many rural zones will see little to no assistance as resources are triaged to population centers or strategic assets. This isn't conspiracy theorizing. It's the logical outcome of limited resources being allocated according to strategic priorities during an unprecedented crisis. Understanding these limitations isn't an indictment of government intentions, but a clear-eyed assessment of capacity constraints in an EMP scenario. The help that arrives will be too little, too late for most people. Your survival depends on what you've prepared before the event, not what might show up afterward. I'm not saying this to be pessimistic. I'm saying it so you understand the reality. FEMA openly admits they can't handle a nationwide catastrophe. The Strategic National Stockpile is designed for regional emergencies, not a continental-scale disaster. Local emergency services will be overwhelmed within hours. You need to be prepared to be self-sufficient for months, possibly years, not days. True recovery begins locally, not with grand national restoration projects. Small hydro installations on irrigation canals, windmills retrofitted to power belt-driven alternators, stationary bike generators, biodiesel from waste cooking oil, methane digesters fed by livestock manure. These become the building blocks of resilient microgrids that don't depend on the national infrastructure healing itself. Communities that create a rugged 12-volt DC backbone for LED lighting and radio communications will dramatically outpace those passively awaiting national restoration. A neighborhood solar array charging a battery bank that powers a community center becomes an island of capability in a sea of darkness. Collaboration with amateur radio networks forms a skeletal internet of voice relays, passing essential trade and security information from region to region. Every survivor household should master basic soldering, battery reclamation from spent laptop cells, and improvised voltage regulation using scavenged components. These seemingly technical skills become the foundation of a new, more resilient infrastructure built from the components of the old. The microgrids that emerge won't resemble the seamless power we take for granted today. They'll be intermittent, capacity-constrained, and maintenance-intensive, but they'll provide enough functionality to preserve critical knowledge, enable basic healthcare, and maintain the communication channels necessary for broader coordination and eventual rebuilding. The seeds of the new grid grow in the shell of the old. Start learning these skills now. Take an electronics course, learn solar installation, understand how batteries work and how to maintain them. Join your local ham radio club. These aren't just hobbies, they're survival skills for the world that comes after. Let's bring all of this down to earth with specific actions you need to take starting today. First, place 2 shortwave or ham radio handhelds, a backup solar charger, and a thumb drive library of survival manuals inside a double-layer Faraday container. These become your information lifeline when all other sources go silent. Store 90 days of potable water or develop the ability to harvest and purify from a nearby source that won't disappear in a crisis. Remember, urban water systems fail completely without grid power. Build a 6-month shelf-stable pantry focused on calories per cubic inch. Think rice, beans, pasta, oils. Then rotate that stock every 6 months to keep it fresh.
Food becomes both survival necessity and valuable trade good. Acquire at least one pre-1990 diesel or gasoline vehicle with minimal electronics and shield crucial spare parts in metal containers. Transportation that functions when others are stranded creates enormous strategic advantage. If that's not feasible, at least have bicycles and the tools to maintain them. A working bicycle becomes incredibly valuable when vehicles don't run. Harden your home entry points with 3-inch screws and all strike plates, exterior window bars or shutters, and interior blackout drapes that prevent light signatures at night from broadcasting your preparedness. Form a 5-family mutual aid group. Practice radio communications regularly. Share tool redundancy to reduce individual costs, and drill night watch protocols before you need them under stress. Map alternate routes out of town that cross railroad corridors and drainage easements instead of clogged highways. Knowledge of these secondary pathways could mean the difference between escape and entrapment. Teach every family member how to operate without electronics. Compass navigation, mechanical water pumping, manual food preparation, basic first aid. These skills transform dependents into contributors during crisis. Start now. Don't wait. Every week you delay is another week you're vulnerable. I'm not trying to scare you into action. I'm trying to wake you up to the reality that preparation takes time. You can't build a 6-month food supply overnight. You can't learn essential skills in a weekend. You can't establish community relationships in a crisis. All of this has to happen before disaster strikes. An EMP strike is simultaneously a technological catastrophe and a human crisis. The lights vanish in an instant, but what kills in the months afterward is a toxic combination of fragile infrastructure, lack of foresight, and social fracture. By grounding your preparations in water security, layered defense, tangible skills, and community alliances, you transform from potential victim to stabilizing force while others flail in the dark.
Store knowledge printed on paper that survives when screens go black. Protect strategic electronics with layered shielding. Cultivate calories in soil rather than depending on supply chains. And embed yourself in a network of resolute neighbors who understand what's at stake. That resolve, backed by practical action taken before crisis hits, is how you light a path through the silent, lawless night that follows an EMP, and emerge not merely alive, but ready to rebuild something worthy on the other side. Listen, I know this stuff is heavy. I know it can feel overwhelming, but here's what I've learned in over a decade of prepping. Taking action, even small action, immediately reduces anxiety. Every jar of food you put on the shelf, every gallon of water you store, every skill you learn makes you more resilient and more confident. You don't have to do everything at once. Just start. Start somewhere. Start today. And speaking of starting, if you haven't grabbed that free guide yet, the $50 food supply, do it now. It's in the description and pinned in the comments. It's completely free, and it'll give you a solid foundation to build on. Sometimes the hardest part is just taking that first step, and this guide makes it easy. If this video helped you understand the EMP threat more clearly and gave you practical steps to prepare, do me a favor and hit that like button. It helps the algorithm show this information to more people who need it. Share this with someone you care about. Drop a comment below and let me know what aspect of EMP preparation you want me to dive deeper into next. Should we talk about specific Faraday cage construction, water purification methods, community building strategies? Let me know and I'll make it happen. And if you're not subscribed yet, hit that subscribe button and notification bell so you never miss potentially life-saving information like this. I release new preparedness content every week, covering everything from food storage to security to skills development. This channel exists to help you and your family become more prepared, more resilient, and more confident in your ability to handle whatever comes. Until next time, stay prepared, stay resilient, and remember, the best time to prepare was yesterday. The second best time is right now. I'll see you in the next one.